This is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners in cooperation with Prophecy DeFi. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. My name is Alex Tapscott here with co-host Andrew Young. We have a great show for you today. We're going to try and answer the question, does decentralized finance need a decentralized internet in order to succeed? And we're very lucky to have an excellent guest joining us on the program, Greg Osuri, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Akash. Greg is a seasoned open source developer of 25 plus years, and he has quite a rap sheet, which I'll try and go through quickly here. Prior to Akash, Greg founded Angel Hack, the world's largest hackathon organization with over 200,000 developers across 164 cities around the world. At Angel Hack, he helped launch several developer companies, including Firebase, which was acquired by Google in 2014. Greg launched his career at IBM and later designed Kaiser Permanente's first cloud architecture. As an expert in open source, distributed systems, and blockchain, Greg is a featured international speaker and has spoken recently at events including Kong Summit, BlockCon, and Block to the Future. You can check Greg out on Twitter. He's a great follow. I've been following him for a few years now, 20-something thousand followers and counting. And he's also been featured in Be in Crypto, CoinDesk, Cointelegraph, Forbes, TechCrunch, and Yahoo Finance as well. So Greg, before we get into the big question of the day, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey from IBM to Angel Hack and then, eventually into blockchain? When was it that you realized that this was a big deal?
So I began with enterprise software, that I believe gave me quite a bit of insight as a consultant with IBM. I could travel, different places and, work with different companies. Short periods, but you would learn a lot when you're exposed to so many different things. That led me to Kaiser Permanente in around 2007 timeframe. That gave me the kiss of Silicon Valley, right? So this was a very special time when Web 2 was being was brewing from Web 1. We're transitioning. This is before, right around time Twitter was founded. So it's very, very early days of Web 2 and the revolution, the solo mode revolution, we call it, right? So I had an incredible opportunity to witness the genesis of Web 2 and really get the energy from Silicon Valley. That's my, and I eventually transitioned, found a job in Silicon Valley. That gave me incredible insight into how startups are built, early stage startups especially. I saw through a startup I was working at through acquisition to Bankrate, and made amazing friends. And I grew up in India. I grew up in a time when we learned programming from books. I learned how to program without computers. So it was in I would say I was 13 in 1994, and an amazing thing for me growing up was there was an awesome community around me that would help me out when I'm stuck in different programming, puzzles and whatnot, right? So I learned from books and community engagement. And when I moved to the West, I noticed there is a culture of isolation here more than engagement. And that really inspired me to, really champion this concept called hackathons. And hackathons were a very underground concept back in 2006. I founded Angel Hack to make them more mainstream. So we brought in, the best way to describe Angel Hack is it's a slumber party for geeks. So you can, come with an idea, build something in 24 hours or, 36 hours without sleep, a lot of Red Bull, pizza, and you can build something amazing out of it. I just love that energy that we would get. And amazing companies like Firebase, was launched at Angel Hack, and several other developer-focused companies. And it was also an amazing way for platforms to come and showcase the technology and get introduced to developers. So the energy was just enormous. And Angel Hack eventually grew to a kind of very distributed organization. Still had centralized tenants, but highly distributed, about 50 cities around the world and 150,000 developers doing all kinds of amazing things. And a big problem I noticed with developers interacting with developers across the world was the friction of making software available from the time you develop to the time you to deploy, right? So a big challenge back then, even now for a big degree, is you would have software that you could use to make your deployment simple, but that usually doesn't scale very well. And software that scales really well is very hard to use. So there's this friction between productivity and scalability. So founded a company to solve that problem in 2015 called Overclock Labs. This is when I got introduced to this new technology called Kubernetes and Docker. In 2013, I found a Docker or containers in general, right before Docker was even introduced, to solve this parity problem, we call it, in deployment. So I decided to focus on that problem, and Docker came along and made containers really simple. And I was introduced to Kubernetes by the Google folks, and I just fell in love with it. I was working on different schedulers back then, trying to make Docker fault tolerant. Not to get into too deep into tech, but I got involved. I was just fortunate to be involved in a lot of these amazing pioneering technologies right when they were just booming, right? And founded Overclock Labs to make Kubernetes a reality, to take Kubernetes to market. I mean, this is probably the first company to take Kubernetes to market. It's on TechCrunch the story on how we took Kubernetes from a very unknown concept. And as we were deploying Kubernetes into different data centers, we noticed enormous amounts of capacity in these data centers is not used. Somewhere north of 85% of capacity is not used. And we built a technology to enable any data center to become a cloud provider internally. In doing so, we developed a very decentralized technology in the sense that the state at these edge nodes, edge locations would not rely on a central control plane, but rather sync in a peer-to-peer manner using BitTorrent style protocol and using Merkle tree style integrity checks. So when you put Merkle tree and BitTorrent together, you end up with a blockchain. So we kind of stumbled upon this blockchain thing, and we formalized in 2016. And 2017, we added economics around it and really understanding the incentives and how the value flows through the system. And been working on it took about 3 years to launch several testnets and finally a product that we felt was ready for the market. And now Akash is experiencing a growth. It's 9 months old, and we're seeing a few hundreds of applications right now actively using it. And we learned quite a bit on while interacting with the users as to what features are very valuable and what features are not, and going through the whole cycle of products. So that's a quick summary of how I got to doing what I'm doing right now.
That's fascinating. So I think for people who are listening in, most computing and storage doesn't occur on your device anymore. It happens in these things called clouds, and there's a few large cloud providers who are, the biggest corporations on the planet, right? Like Amazon Web Services, which is part of Amazon, or Google Cloud, and these other things. And the idea behind a decentralized cloud, from my understanding, is that there's all this latent computing power that can be harnessed, which is really interesting. But B, it's also censorship resistant, meaning that a company goes bankrupt or changes its policy, all of a sudden you can't lose your data or something like that. And then the third would be that it's unstoppable in the sense that a single entity has a shutdown, but the cloud can keep running. So recently, maybe there's more to it, but those are sort of the three reasons that I understand. So with this I think was put into very sharp focus for a lot of folks, because a week ago from when we recorded this, AWS went down. And what was ironic about that was that a lot of DeFi applications and other crypto related things also sort of suffered as a result of that. So this decentralized financial system is really running on just some company's cloud, question mark? Like that's sort of the criticism. And so can we really ever have DeFi without decentralized cloud infrastructure? Can you sort of unpack that a little bit?
Of course. I mean, what we're doing with DeFi and open systems is not something brand new. I would actually, draw the lineage back to the Web 1, right? So if you look at Web 1, the entire premise of the internet was designed to keep us safe from a Russian intervention of removing a centralized authority that has control over communications. And the entire Web 1 was built on the premise that you can have different systems talk to each other in a peer-to-peer manner. And slowly technologies added up with more centralized entities like DNS for discovery and whatnot came along. And granted, yes, the evolution wasn't focused necessarily on making it easy to use. So the Web 2 came along as a layer to solve the resource acquisition problem or making it easy to use, right? So they've abstracted all the potential problems Web 1 created and package in a way that's consumable at a price point that's ideal for the user. In doing so, created moats, a competitive moats, and evolved to be rent seekers, right? So it's not like people don't have computers or data centers that Amazon provides something special. Amazon just makes it easy for developers to get access, right? There are 8.4 million data centers in the world. And so the premise of Web3 is, I believe, and I strongly believe, is to take what the original intent of Web 1 was and just ensuring that our civil liberties or the problems created by the Web 2 can be solved, right? So it's not something new, if you ask me. Now, okay, and what happened recently and the result of this Web 2 rent seeker, mode is, we take this convenience and we sacrifice our values for convenience, right? We take comfort over values, essentially, right? Why? Because, you're a developer, you have to ship code. And if you have to go put a server in a data center or have your users put data center servers, which is a month-long process, and ensure the software that exists to actually deploy these services in a reliable manner, that takes a lot of work. It's a lot of work to use an independent server versus using something like an Amazon, which takes relatively less time. So yes, if I had to make a choice, I would, you choose comfort over values, and the result obviously is censorship, right? So, and that needs to change, and that's changing. So people like Akash has some decent growth, and some DeFi projects like Osmosis and the newer technically advanced projects, I would say, because Cosmos ecosystem generally tends to have higher quality individuals, because it's hard to sort of like bootstrap a project in a Cosmos ecosystem. So you're doing a lot of infrastructure work yourself, like bootstrapping validators and whatnot. So in that sense, I think it's easy to use Akash, but in all honesty, Akash is very difficult to use as it stands right now, right? As it stands right now. And so the trade-offs right now, presented between Web 2 and Web 3 is the usability.
Yeah, so I know that Andrew wants to jump in, but thank you for that refreshing bit of honesty. I think we talk about how DeFi and distributed applications are growing at this very rapid rate, which they are, but the basis is so small, right? We're still in the very early innings, and creating usable, easy to understand, things is critical to gaining mass adoption. So I just want to say thanks for that. Andrew, I know you wanted to hop in.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, obviously, as a developer platform, I guess what are some of the applications in development right now? I mean, I know you mentioned Osmosis, and we had Sunny on the podcast a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then obviously Cosmos, we had Pong from Tendermint as well last week.
And Ethan, we're like accidentally, this isn't intentionally, it's just like we have a lot of Cosmos people, maybe because there's a lot of interesting stuff happening on that network.
Yeah, exactly. And the Toronto connection definitely helps.
Yeah.
I would just love to know some of the projects using Akash network today, and maybe some that are kind of in the pipeline.
So I would say like three distinct categories of projects that are building on Akash. One, I would put it in a bucket of innovators, right? So DeFi projects, NFT projects, games. So several. I mean, Osmosis is a big one. Several media projects like Omniflix running on Akash, and several games like Strange Clan. I believe there's another DAO for Minecraft. So Akash is perfect for DAOs because it removes a key man risk when it comes to like who controls the deployment. Anyone with a key can control the deployment, and that key can be a multi-sig. So if you want a multi-sig based cloud infrastructure, Akash is the only solution. So it makes sense for DAOs and whatnot, right? So we're seeing quite a bit of adoption there. The bigger load comes from arbitragers, right? So that's new. That's the case for any new markets, right? So Akash right now offers a price point that's 1/3 to 1/5 lower than Amazon. So when you see that sort of arbitrage opportunity, you're going to, the best way to realize that opportunity is to mine. So we're seeing quite a bit of miners. It's technology called pocket miners. We're seeing quite a bit of Chia miners, and we're seeing a lot of these miners. And arbitrages are kind of essential, but also kind of like they can increase the prices. But so far, it's been more supply than demand, surprisingly. So far, it's still like 1/3 cheaper than Amazon. And the third set of users are ecosystem builders. So there are several applications being built on top of Akash. Akashalytics, there's Argo, which I think they're changing the name now. These are different paths. There's a machine learning stack being built on Akash. These are different paths that take Akash and solve for the usability problem I was talking about earlier by hyper localizing to a use case that can improve the user experience exponentially while leveraging the cost advantage and the openness the Akash provides, right? So, and this is after 9 months we're talking about. So this is unheard of for any, and I've seen Web 2. The kind of growth we're looking at is unheard of for any Web 2 application. And I really like, when you look at Akash, yes, you have all these benefits of open systems, but the real value I see is composability, right? It's such an underrated property of a decentralized system, I think. And because of the composability, you see the DeFi evolution, right? DeFi is all about Lego blocks building on each other. And we kind of starting to see that in the decentralized cloud ecosystem as well. These are Lego blocks of different transactions or different messages that you can send from each protocol to each other. And IBC is a great example of a cross chain message passing sort of like composable frameworks, right? And so you can actually customize Akash to whatever form you want to customize. They'll look completely different. Some of the users that interact with Akashalytics or Argo don't care or don't know they interact with Akash. And that's the beauty of it. And that's where we're going. And that's is a very powerful tenant and a property of Web3 systems.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And one thing actually you sort of brought up though was about composability being sort of the secret sauce. One thing I'm kind of, I guess, curious about is when we had kind of the, at least in the DeFi space, everything on Ethereum, composability was sort of taken for granted, or I guess kind of an easy thing to sort of hook into. Now, as we're moving into this kind of multi-chain world, there's about 30 different chains now with their own DeFi ecosystems. And obviously with the launch, sort of the emergence of Cosmos, we're kind of, in our opinion, we're thinking we're going to be heading towards kind of hundreds. How does composability sort of look like in this multi-chain world? And is that something that the Cash Network can sort of help with?
Yeah, so Akash is the first IBC chain, I believe, at least, or first or second to enable IBC. We made a bet on IBC very early, and we were core contributors. The reason for that is we knew that before that, track back, right? Why even sovereign chain? Why not building on something like Ethereum or Solana or a shared state security model? Because we wanted sovereignty with economics and we want sovereignty with scalability. As an infrastructure platform, scalability is extremely important, even for deploying a small blog. scalability is important, and the outcome is Akash has been live for 9 months and has gone down exactly 0 times. Granted, we operate a small scale, but we have not gone down. It cannot go down, and that is a very important property of the system. And the reason for that is,
I just like, is 9 months, is that, how does that compare, to in AWS's first 9 months of running? Like, is that typical for centralized cloud, or is that really something, like, how does that compare?
I remember, okay, I mean, there's no evidence or data that I can actually pinpoint to back it up, but I remember using AWS in 2008. I introduced AWS to Kaiser, people laughed at me. I used AWS before there was a command line. It was just pure API-based product. It worked for the most part. And they did not start off as a EC2 or the compute side. They started off as something like Firebase, Filecoin, S3 mode, right? And it was low reliable. It was reliable to a certain degree. But it wasn't very alive. Like I would say, like, don't quote me on it, but I wouldn't be a 5.9 reliability like Akash is right now. Akash is 5.9, it's 9.999. And that's extremely hard when it comes to like reliability, and it has 0 DevOps people working on it. The system just runs automatically, right?
Yeah.
And the reason for that is the scalability, sovereignty over scalability, right? So we have control over our own destiny when it comes to how we scale, and we can make trade-offs, right? As to what we can focus on versus building on a general platform like Ethereum or Solana, where you can make those trade-offs. You have to inherit the scalability that the underlying chain provides you. Now, it could be a good thing because you don't have to bootstrap security, right? Could be a bad thing because you have no control over the destiny of your software, right? Same thing goes with the economics. Akash, it currently costs about 1/4 of a cent gas fees to deploy anything on Akash, because everything is a transaction, right? So if deploying a blog is a transaction. If it's going to be an Ethereum-based gas fees, you're never going to see any deployments for Akash. If it's going to cost you like $70 every time there's an NFT drop to deploy your blog, so I believe in a multi-chain future. Absolutely, there's no doubt. And it's like we saw with Web 2 too. You build on a shared platform. Like I've seen this with Firebase, right? You go build initially with Firebase, but the time when you have to like really scale up, you go sovereign. I think the future is sovereignty, right? There's no doubt. And now, how do we? Well, what are the challenges? Well, we can do like a mutex lock across different blockchains, right? Because they're built in different shade systems. So there are several challenges when you are building on top of IBC. But the fact that the first sort of like possibility that you can actually compose is solved. Now the next possibility, and how do you actually do something like something asynchronous or similar to like a shade system? I think we're getting there. There's still a lot of work to be done with IBC. But if you use Osmosis, you'll know what I'm talking about. Like the experience is silky smooth. It's amazing, and it works. It doesn't error out. I mean, it's still, again, multi-chain is not a single protocol controlling. It's supported by a diverse set of validators that are actually running these like relayers, we call them. There's still questions on how to incentivize this validator. There's a lot of work that needs to be done till we can say a multi-chain future is ready. But the fact that there are numerous, like 30 to 40 chains all actually working right now, token transfers functioning, is a amazing testament that is possible.
Oh, sorry, Andrew, I was on mute, but I wanted to actually ask a follow-up. So I think that there are other similar kinds of projects that are attempting to do something like Akash. I think probably the best known one is a thing called Filecoin. And there's a native token, FIL. And there's a native token as well for the Akash network, which is AKT. Now, I think that it would be helpful to understand what the value capture and purpose of the token is in the Akash network. I can guess, but I think it'd be good to know how that works and what the role of the token is in all of it.
So cloud, when I say cloud, it means several things, right? So a cloud, like if you look at Amazon, so Amazon has storage, Amazon has DNS or discovery, Amazon has compute, Amazon has serverless, like application layer services like machine learning, or they even have blockchain hosting, right? So different services. They have a GraphQL, service. They have video encoding services, all different services that make your job simple, right? So when it comes to Web3 or the decentralized web or DWeb, to be more specific, there is no single company that provides all the services or single protocol that provides the services. It's a mixture of several protocols. Like Akash provides compute, doesn't provide long-term storage. So any storage that you get on Akash is ephemeral. That means it goes away once your lease is terminated. And well, so what that means is if you're running something like a database, like a Postgres running on Akash, once you terminate your lease, that data goes away. And that's not ideal. So you want to back the data up to something like a Filecoin or a Skynet. We have several examples. People use Saya, which is a little better, actually, much better experience than Filecoin, to be honest with you. And or like RV, which you want permanence, right? And it's a lot more expensive than Saya. But if you want to have permanent backups for your data, you can use RV. And now you got to be able to, you have your, application with an IP address, but you want that IP address to resolve to a domain name. Well, you can go use a centralized service, or you can use like ENS is actually pretty centralized because it goes to ICANN, or you can use something like Handshake, which is heavily decentralized, where you don't have the reliance on ICANN, right? And now you want, video processing or video encoding because you do video streaming or something on your web server. So you can go use a centralized Amazon, but you don't want to do that. You can use LivePeer to do that, right? So there's several of these amazing services that are sort of like reaching product market fit, earning real revenue, like early stages, but still there's real revenue and there's real value being exchanged on these services. They're all being interoperating right now. There's several examples where people use RV and Akash together, RV and Skynet together. Akash and Skynet together. I think there are a few examples with Filecoin as well, but each of them doing separate things, doing them really well, right? And now the next big challenge is interoperability. Like, yes, still it's very sort of like high friction environment where you have to hold different tokens to pay for them. You use Filecoin tokens to pay for storage, Akash tokens to pay for Akash. In an ideal world, you just should be able to use any token to pay for anything. And that's the IBC future that we're going towards. So right now, you can actually exchange Osmosis or Terra tokens or USD tokens for Akash on an exchange, but extending that experience to deployment and actually different utility is a future that I would love to see. And we're still not even there yet, right? So yes, the Web2, the Web3 is taking a much more distributed, much more diverse attitude than Web2, because Web2 is all about concentration of power. Web3 is about distribution of power, right? And we're seeing that very clearly with DWeb, and I'm really excited for that future.
Yeah, and that actually dovetails really nicely into my next question. Really is. Akash, you guys seem very like laser focused right now on sort of the cloud computation, but the network can support, at least to my understanding, can support sort of these other applications as well. And one thing we were talking about with Sunny was how initially, Osmosis is sort of hyper focused on being the best kind of AMM that it can be. But it's not necessarily sort of cutting off the opportunity of expansion into sort of lending markets and other sort of decentralized finance applications. I'm just kind of curious, is that something that's maybe not on your roadmap, but at least sort of on your radar in terms of long-term expansion opportunities, or are you sort of just kind of totally focused on specialization?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's on a roadmap actually. If you go to akash.network/roadmap, you'll notice the last holy grail is managed services. like a cloud is not complete without managed services, right? So Akash, fortunately, where the position Akash is in is a very sort of like unification position, like because compute is the core for everything you do. Like you can't use live peer and Rweave together without Akash. You know what I mean? Like, so you need that compute processing layer. And that means that puts us in a very special position where we can become, we are essentially positioned as a gateway to Web3, right? Because that's your first touch point. So, and like I said, there are amazing services like Rweave and Skynet that require different tokens. But ideally, you want to be able to go through Akash to simplify user experience, right? As a central, like a gateway, right? So we are working towards an open API for managed services. There's another amazing new service called Pocket Network, which reliable, where you can run different nodes in a completely non-custodial manner. It's a solution to for the heavily centralized services like Infura and like Coinbase Cloud or whatnot. This is a decentralized version. I'm very excited about them, but it's hard to use a service. So ideally, you want to be able to use Akash and provision a pocket right from Akash, right? Or provision a Postgres right from Akash without actually managing the Postgres, or any service, either Redis or a load balancer, or any of the services. Amazon has about 200 services, and Akash will have much more than that if we incorporate the principles of permissionless composable systems, right? So that's the holy grail, and we're getting there. But the first thing, first thing we have to do is stay laser focused and build a product that is amazing in one thing and one thing only. Because without that hyper focus, we're not going to achieve the scale that we need to, right? But once you unlock the scale, the opportunities are enormous. And the beauty of composable systems and just seeing what kind of things people build on Akash is so exciting, right? So we're learning a lot. So a good example is today there are about 4 different UIs for Akash, none of them being built by us. Akash is a completely command line API only product built by the team, but there are 4 different UIs. There is a web UI, there's mobile UI, there's desktop UI. I don't know why you mobile UI, but there's a mobile UI, all having different workflows and different ways of how they think and how to deploy on Akash. And we're learning a lot from these UIs, right? So extending that composability, and maybe there's an opportunity to enable, Akash is a layer 1, right? So just to be clear, so just because we haven't unlocked or enabled smart contracts capability doesn't mean Akash can't support smart contracts. So it can't support smart contracts. But we want to rely on something like Agoric that's building amazing JavaScript-based smart contracts, right? Maybe in order for us to work with them, maybe we need to enable CosmWasm on our side as well. So yes, so we'll be you're going to see quite a bit in 2020 on expansionary features, or at least the discussions. And there's a whole rework happening on economics now for Akash. We're looking at enabling more DeFi primitives into the D cloud. In the sense, we want to do futures for compute. A futures market for compute is something that doesn't exist today, and I think it'd be great to do it in an open way. And a lot of exciting things, yeah.
Well, I think we could keep going for a lot longer. I just have one more question, which is, we talked about the benefits of a decentralized cloud. You mentioned at the beginning this trade-off between our values and convenience. And I can see why a lot of DeFi projects and other crypto native things would want to use a decentralized cloud. But can you make a prediction? Do you think that at some time, who are the biggest buyers of cloud computing, like Walmart or Goldman Sachs, or like, some vast, large global enterprise will be using decentralized cloud infrastructure or not at some point?
Oh, absolutely. Like I trace back to my time when I was so excited about Amazon Web Services. I was yelling top of my voice at Kaiser. Remember, like, you got to look at AWS. And nobody took me seriously because AWS was composability only, not usability. They didn't even have a UI, right? Only API when they began. And API only products attract developers, the right type of people that you want early days in your product. You don't want a Goldman Sachs or a Walmart user who is so used to clicking, and complaining a million times, expecting or entitled to support. You don't want that user. You want a user that when there's an issue, they'll dig into it themselves, find a solution, come up with the idea, and that's how you scale. So we're taking the primitives, and I've launched developer first products with Firebase and whatnot, and I've seen this happen so many times, right? The early set of users will determine the success of the project. If you attract the wrong set of early users, that will be a disaster, because if you're expecting users that feel entitled in the early days, you're not going to succeed. And look at Ethereum, right? Ethereum early set of users are not people that are so comfortable using smart contracts or like Solidity. I mean, Solidity is a terrible language, but really like people that could see past that and actually see the value and develop around the limitations of Solidity and come to, and seeing the growth that we see at Ethereum. Any developer product, I've seen this happen. And by focusing on composability and not usability, we made a conscious choice that we can attract high-end developers, and we're doing that right now. So in 5 to 6 years' time, you're going to see, some of these enterprises adopt. And there's an amazing book called Innovator's Dilemma, and I'd love for you to read that. And you can clearly see the adoption curve, right? So we're kind of seeing champions now in different companies. We are seeing enterprise adoption, but we're not necessarily focused on it. And we'll see once in a while these big companies or big banks like, hey, Akash is awesome, yada yada yada. I'm like, well, cool. Show me something you've done with it, more than pitch me an idea, right? Like, so the developers are the key, and it's going to be crucial for us at this stage and in moving forward as well.
That's great. You mentioned the Innovator's Dilemma. I'm actually happen to have a copy of Blockchain Revolution on my desk. And Clayton Christensen, the late, great Clayton Christensen, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, said, and this is not to toot my own horn, but to show that he was also thinking about this as well. The Tapscots have written the book literally on how to survive and thrive in the next wave of technology-driven disruption, likely to become one of the iconic books of our time. It's a shame that he wasn't around to see what you're doing here with Akash in its current form, because I think he would have recognized the beauty in taking these existing models and turning them upside down. So I think that concludes today's discussion. It was great to chat, Greg. This has been really eye-opening. We'd love to have you back in a year from now, once you sign a big deal, once Walmart starts using Akash or Goldman Sachs or someone like that. But in the meantime, it's developers. It reminds me of Steve Ballmer leaping up and down on stage at the Microsoft event in the 90s.
PTSD from that.
Yeah, we should superimpose your face on his body and get a video of that going around online. I think it might go viral. Anyway, great to chat. Thanks for joining DeFi Decoded. That concludes today's episode. We'll see you next week for our final episode of the year before we go on a little 2-week hiatus. We have Ryan Selkis Masari, who just wrote a really great report called his Crypto Theses, and he'll be talking about some predictions for the new year. So you will want to tune in to that one as well. Thanks, Greg. See you next time.
Thanks, Alex, Andrew, and Ryan. Thanks a lot.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.